Okay, John chapter 2. Let's dive in. John chapter 2. You know, there's something about this book that for years has kind of captured people's hearts. And I think part of that has to do with just the way that John wrote it. You look at the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which, by the way, they're called the Synoptic Gospels. John is in a category on its own because the other Gospels, they talk a lot about places that Jesus went or even the words that Jesus said. But John, he takes it a step further. John's focus is more about who Jesus was. His whole passion, his whole focus in this book is to really give us insight and clarity, all centered around the person of Jesus. In fact, John chapter 20, this is worth writing down. This is kind of the mission statement of the Gospel of John, where John says, "This is why I wrote the book to you." He said, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John says, this is why I wrote this book. This is why this book matters. This is why this book is so important. He says, I want you to know that Jesus isn't just another guru or teacher or religious leader. Jesus is Messiah. Jesus is the Son of God. And I want you to notice there the word sign. Many other signs. This is a key word, an important word, as we're going to see going through the Gospel of John. In the Greek language, the word sign is the word semeion. Let me hear you say semeion. And it's a word that actually has a lot of background in cultural anthropology. It's where we get our English word for semiotic or semiosis. A sign is how symbols communicate truth. Think, for example, of the symbol of a traffic light or an emoji, right? It's just a symbol, but it communicates something to us. And John says that I want you to know that Jesus is Messiah. And so what I've done in my book is I've given you signs. I've given you clues that reveal who Jesus is. Did you know in the Gospel of John, this is important, there are 7 signs. 7 signs. Here they are. If you're a note taker, grab a pen, piece of paper, steal one, whatever. You're going to need this, or take a picture of it. That'll work too. But here are the 7 signs that we see in the Gospel of John. Each one of these signs is pointing us to the reality, the identity of Jesus, and giving us greater clarity of who he is. Turning water into wine, healing the nobleman's son, healing the disabled man, feeding the multitude, walking on water, healing the blind man, and raising Lazarus, John 11. We'll get there in 2040. I can't wait for that story. But these are the 7 signs. And John, he lays it out for us in this book, and he says each one of these is going to give you greater understanding of who Jesus was. This is my purpose. This is my goal. This is why I wrote the book to you. Now, today we get to look at the very first sign, turning water into wine, from H2O to Pellegrino. So let's go. Verse 1, I'll just read it to you. I'll share a few things, and then we'll open up the water. On the 3rd day, a wedding took place. On the 3rd day, interesting, because we all know what happened on the 3rd day. Something about this story has to do with resurrection. Something about this story has to do with renewal and healing of all things. On the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. And Jesus' mother was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." We'll come back to that. It's a really interesting reply. And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. And then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." And they did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine, after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." And what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory. Notice, this is the first of the what? Signs. How many signs are there in the Gospel of John? 7. This is the first through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, and there they stayed for a few days. Isn't it interesting that the first sign wasn't some epic event where Jesus ripped open the clouds with thunder and lightning? Here's my glory. You want evidence that I'm the Messiah? Here you go. No, the very first sign was very common, very ordinary. We've all been there at a wedding with friends, and they need wine, and so Jesus makes some. Now, here's the first thing we need to know about weddings, because when we begin to dig into the background, the culture, the history, it really makes the story come alive. Weddings in first century Jewish culture were a massive event. Now, we've all been part of big weddings. Maybe you've been a part of smaller, simple weddings. I love those. My wife and I, we used to live on Maui, and we were there for 8 years. I did a ton of weddings there. And people want to get married in Maui, typically because, A, they want to save money. Do you know the average wedding costs $25,000? 25 grand, which kind of makes me nervous. Save now if you're a parent. $25,000. And so they think, well, we could have this big elaborate wedding, 25 grand, or we could just take a third of it and we can go to Hawaii. That sounds better. But then also the relational dynamics. Some weddings are just complicated. You're like, I don't know if I want all those same people in the same room. So I'll take 2 or 3 of my friends, we'll go to Hawaii, and we'll just have a simple wedding. And so I did all these simple weddings, and I loved it. Like many times they'd be barefoot, standing on the beach. I do, you're done, you're Maui'd, right? And that's it. So if you're engaged, like, hey, call me, let's go to Maui, I'll marry you. That'd be awesome. So there's something about simple weddings, but in the ancient world, it was anything but simple. Did you know that weddings were arranged by the parents? In first century Jewish culture, who you were going to marry was determined by your parents. So when the kid was 2 or 3 years old, you get parents who get together and they just start talking. Hey, what do you think? That sounds good. They'd arrange the whole thing. And so these kids really didn't have a choice in the matter. And later on, when they're older, teenagers, 17, 18, 19, whatever, they would get married. That's how they did things in that culture. And again, the kids, you just grew up knowing, okay, Johnny over there, he's going to be my husband someday. Kind of weird. Now, for years, I used to think that was really backwards and oppressive. But then I had a daughter. Now I'm like, maybe that's kind of wise after all. So Tim McDonald and I were in deep negotiation right now, aren't we, Tim? So it was arranged by the parents, and then you get closer to the time of betrothal, which was their engagement period, and that could last months or even years in some cases. And here's the catch, though. Only one person knew the hour, the time, the day of the wedding. Only one person knew. Does anyone know? Bible trivia. Does anyone know? No? Really? The father of the groom. So he was the only one. It was kept under wraps. It was his secret. He didn't tell anyone. He knew, okay, this will be the day, this will be the hour when my son is going to marry her. So the groom had no clue. Now, he kind of had an idea of the general season, but he didn't know the day or the hour. So what does the groom do? Well, when it gets kind of close to that time, the groom dedicates around the clock his time to preparing a house for his bride-to-be. Where was this house? It was attached to his father's house. Now, again, this is so different. It's very communal and family-oriented. Typically, nowadays, 2018, America, you get married and you're like, we're going to Nebraska. But in those days, it's like you're getting married and you're now literally part of the family. So the groom is preparing a house for his bride. He's working hard, working around the clock, getting everything perfect, exactly how he thinks she would like it to be. And she, meanwhile, she's getting ready in her own way for the wedding. She doesn't know the day or the hour. She kind of has an idea, but she knows at a moment's notice her groom would come for her. And sure enough, when the father said, okay, son, it is time, the son, he had to be ready, he had to be finished, and he would go out into the streets of the village with a shout, with cheering, with joy, with celebration. The day's here. I'm going to get married today. And so all of his friends would come out into the streets. In many, many cases, the whole village would come out. This is a big event, a huge event. And they'd sing and shout and basically form a parade going all the way to the bride's house. She hears the shouting, she hears the joy. She's like, oh, I guess I'm getting married. And so she had to be ready. Grab the dress, text her friends, let's go, let's do this thing. And they make their way back to the father's house where they'd have this ceremony. Now, after you have the ceremony, nowadays you have a reception, right? It lasts what? 1, 2, 3, 4 hours, and then you're done. In the first century, in Jewish culture, guess how long the reception lasts? Yeah, a week. And can you imagine trying to entertain people for an entire week? So they'd have the ceremony, then it's partying and laughter and joy and dancing and celebration and Jay-Z, all of that. And then the groom would then take his bride into this house, into this room that he had prepared. They would go in there to watch Netflix and chill, and meanwhile, everyone else, it's really interesting. For an entire week, they're just celebrating, they're partying. Now, what on earth do you do to keep everyone entertained for an entire week? What do you do? I mean, it's hard enough coming up with 2 or 3 hours of entertainment. What do you do for a week? That is where the wine comes in. So in that culture, having enough wine was absolutely mandatory and essential, not just to keep everyone well entertained, but also as a cultural thing. They understood wine to be a sign of hospitality. In fact, check out this quote. This is by a historian. His name's Edward Klink. He said, Jewish culture makes clear that wine was an important part of festive occasions, especially at weddings. Since weddings in the first century were not about 2 people, but about 2 families, the social dynamics were more comprehensive and intense, yes. For this reason, to run out of wine during the wedding celebration was likely to have caused a loss of family, honor, and status. Now, what does that mean? When Jesus' mother comes up to him and she's like, hey, they've run out of wine, this is way more than just, oh, someone made a mistake in catering. This is actually socially really a big deal. This would leave a lasting stain on their reputation as a couple and their ability to show hospitality. People talk about this for years. And so Jesus, he hears this from his mom. What does he do? Well, check out verse 7 if you want to look down. He tells the servants, he said, fill up the jars with water and bring it to the master of the banquet. Now, who's the master of the banquet? It's basically an MC. He's the guy who keeps the whole thing going. He's making the announcements. He's telling people what to eat. He's putting together different events, the party going, the DJ on point. And Jesus says, draw water out, and I want you to bring it to that guy. Now, what are these water pots of stone? Well, this is significant too. Jewish people, they had a heavy emphasis upon ceremonial cleansings and washings. You can read about this in the Old Testament law. Check out the book of Leviticus, which is your favorite book, I know. You're like, I already know those verses. And they had all these rituals that centered around cleanliness. So they would wash their hands before they ate. They would wash their hands in between courses. They washed their hands after they ate. They washed cups and bowls and utensils. They washed feet when their feet got dirty. So in a wedding this size, you have tons and tons of water. And Jesus says, now get some, bring it to the MC. Now, this is what I love, is that Jesus doesn't tell the servants the end game. It's what I would do, right? He's about to do this incredible miracle. Hey, huddle up, guys. I've got something to share with you. Here's the steps I want you to take. I'm going to turn water into wine. Everyone's going to love it. It's going to be the best wine they've ever had. And it's going to be in the Bible. That'll be cool, too. But Jesus doesn't do that. He doesn't tell the servants the plan. He doesn't give them the end game. Instead, he gives them step 1. What's step 1? Go get some water. Okay, now what? Step 2. Bring it to the MC. He led them step by step. How many of us have found that following Jesus looks a whole lot like that? How many of us have discovered that we wish we knew the end game, How many of us are like, man, you're dating someone and you wish you knew if that was the one. You wish you knew what would be the outcome of that financial decision. You wish you knew if you took that career path or studied that major in school, where it would lead you. You wish you knew where your decisions today would take you tomorrow, but we don't. And following Jesus most of the time is not, here's the 10-year plan, here's the 20-year plan. Most of the time, it's, here's the plan for today. Give us this day our daily bread. So every day, we should wake up with the posture of, Lord, you've given me this day. It's a gift. What is your plan, your dream for me today? What do you want me to do? And the Lord will say, here's step one. For you today, I want you to say no to that thing that you've been saying yes to for years, perhaps. Okay, step one, obey. Well, what's the plan for today, Lord? The plan is forgive that person. Ouch? Okay, I'll forgive them today because forgiveness is a daily thing. What do you want me to do today, Lord? I want you to be generous. What should I do today, Lord? I want you to call that person that you've been reluctant to call. What do you want me to do today? Just be loving to your spouse. Do something creative for them. What should I do today? Spend time with your kids. What should I do today? Wash your roommate's dishes. Whatever it is, it's day by day by day. It's a long obedience, in the words of Eugene Peterson, who recently went on to be with the Lord. A long obedience in the same direction. Sometimes I meet with people and they'll say, Dom, I haven't heard from the Lord in years. I wish I knew where I was going. I wish I knew where he wanted me to be and go, but I just don't hear from God. And the question that I'll often ask is, what was the last thing the Lord told you to do? And have you done that? Well, no. It was awkward. I didn't like that. It was too challenging. It was too tough. Well, you need to go back to that first thing he told you to do. You need to obey him there, and you take that step, and the next step is made clear. So many of us, we get fixated on what is step 10, but what God is trying to show us is obey him in the small things. Just take step 1. Give us this day our daily bread. What's the plan, Jesus? I'm your servant. Where do you want me to go? Get some water for someone. Okay? Now bring it to that person, all right? And then that is where miracles happen. You want to see miracles, be faithful in the little things. You want to see God turn water into wine. Be faithful in the little things. You want to be the person God has called you to be. Be obedient in the first step. And so they obeyed him, because the journey of 1,000 miles begins with that first step, and then the miracle happens. I love this story. Jesus saves the day. And then John closes the story, and he says, hey, you know what happened here in Cana of Galilee? He says, you need to know, this was actually sign number 1, numero uno, that we now know through this story, through what Jesus did, that he is, remember John 20, verse 30 and 31, that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. Now I want to pause there for a second, because I kind of wrestle with this story, actually. I've been kind of chewing on it for the last few weeks, and I know that even in this room, there's going to be a wide response to it, and different things that maybe connect with you or don't connect with you. Some of you might be thinking, you know, what's kind of cool about this is knowing all the historical detail and the cultural stuff and weddings and all that. You're kind of jiving with that. Others of you, you're like, no, I really like how it's a picture of obedience, and day by day, it's following Jesus. Some of you, you're like, man, I'm just glad wine's in the Bible. That's what connects with me. That's another sermon. But the question we all have to answer is, how is this story specifically a sign, semiotic, how is it a sign that Jesus actually is God, that he is our Messiah? Because at a superficial level, it kind of seems like any other miracle. And I don't say that lightly. There's tons of miracles in the Bible, and it's a cool one, water into wine, but what's so special about this? How is water turning into wine proof and evidence that Jesus is our Messiah? Let's chew on that for a while. Let's think on that. How does this point us to Jesus' identity? And there's a lot that we could unpack here. There's a lot of things I wish we had time to share, but we don't. But I want to share 2 things. Number 1, This story, turning water into wine, is, first of all, fulfillment of the past. Fulfillment of the past. And number two, it is hope for the future. Hope for the future. This is mind-blowing, so brace yourself. This has just been really, for me, really cool. So I hope it blesses you guys too. Let's look at the first one. John 2 is a fulfillment of the past. Did you know that this story was actually prophesied hundreds of years before? We see signposts pointing to this event throughout the Old Testament, but let me give you one verse. It's from Isaiah, chapter 25, verses 6 through 9, written 700 years before Jesus was even born. It says, "On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich foods for all people, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wine. In that day they will say, 'This is the Lord. We trusted in him. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation.'" Now track with me here. Isaiah 25, like so much of the book of Isaiah, was written to give prophecy about what will happen when the Messiah comes. For thousands of years, the Jewish people have been waiting, watching, yearning, hoping. When will Messiah come? When will he restore our broken world? When will he heal all things? And Isaiah says, you will know that Messiah has come, because one of the things that he is going to do when he comes is he will be at a feast. And at this feast, there is going to be the best of meat and the finest, not just any wine, the best wine. You have saved the best till now. There's something about this wine. We've never tried anything like it. It's incredible. Why wine? Because wine in Scripture is a symbol of two things, if you're taking notes. It's a symbol, number one, of joy. Let us rejoice, Isaiah says, but it's also a symbol of the new covenant. What's the new covenant? Jeremiah chapter 31. If you want to have your mind blown, go to Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34 later on today. It talks about, God says, you've been living in the old covenant where it's about rules and rituals and regulations, but a day is coming when there's going to be a new covenant. I'm going to write my will on your heart. It's no longer about one person saying what you should do. You will all know me, from the least to the greatest. I will be your God. This is the new covenant that Messiah will someday bring. Jeremiah chapter 31. Question, when was the new covenant initiated? When was it initiated? Well, I think of another feast. Jesus is with his disciples. They're sitting around a table, Luke chapter 22, and it's the hour of his death. And Jesus with his friends, he takes bread and he breaks it, and he says, "This is my body that is broken for you. Eat this in remembrance of me." Then he takes a cup of wine, and he says, "This wine represents the new," what? Covenant. This wine, my blood, is the new covenant. I am initiating the new covenant through my death. So Jeremiah 31 is the prophecy that someday Messiah will come, Isaiah 25, with the finest of wines. Luke 22, at another feast, Jesus says, this wine is the new covenant. It's the initiation of something big and beautiful and global, of renewal and restoration and healing of all things. So, John 2 is a direct fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 25 and other Old Testament prophecies as well. But check this out. I love this point. It not only points us to the past, but it also points us to the future. This story is about hope for the future. And I want to draw your attention to a verse that kind of seems confusing at first. Verse 4, when Mary comes up to Jesus and says, they have no wine. And Jesus' response is, my hour has not yet come. What on earth does that mean? Every time you see that phrase, my hour, every time Jesus says it in the Gospel of John, he's talking about one thing. Does anyone know? Does anyone know? I think I heard someone say it, his death. The cross. So when we go through the Gospel of John and you see that phrase, my hour, my hour, my hour, it's always about the cross. So let's go back to this. Mary says, we have no wine, and Jesus says, it's not my time to die. That's kind of a weird response. Jesus, we need wine. I'm not ready to die yet. Like, it doesn't go together, right? Like Portland sun or decaf 8 a.m. Some things just don't work well together. Why would Jesus say this to his mom? I want to suggest to you that Jesus, when he responds this way to Mary, he's not thinking about this wedding in Cana of Galilee. What he has in mind is another wedding. What wedding? Well, did you know that the Bible is full of weddings? Adam and Eve the Bible begins with a wedding. Adam and Eve standing in paradise, the ultimate Maui wedding. And God says the two shall become one, right? That's the first wedding. Jesus begins his ministry where? At a wedding. God's into weddings. He loves weddings. Revelation chapter 21. The last chapter in the Bible is what? A wedding. Did you know, by the way, that Revelation is the only book in the Bible that comes with its own promise? Revelation is the only book in the Bible that says if you read it, you will be blessed. It doesn't say, thank God, if you understand it, you'll be blessed. It just says read the thing and you'll be blessed. So if you want to be blessed this week, read Revelation. And then get therapy. No, it's a great book. It's interesting. So Revelation 21 says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Last chapter of the Bible. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. Sea in the ancient world was a picture of chaos and evil. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a what? Bride, beautifully dressed for her husband, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. The first wedding in the Bible is between a man and a woman. The last wedding in the Bible is between Jesus and the church. We are called in Scripture the bride of Christ. Now check this out. This is so cool. And just like the Jewish weddings, when that day comes, when the bride, us, the church, are in some sense united with Jesus, there is only one who knows the day or the hour. And who's that? It's the Father. Meanwhile, what is the Son doing? What's he doing? John chapter 14, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to do what? Prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. So the Father knows the day and the hour. The Son has gone to prepare a place for you. We, the bride, what's our job? Get ready for the wedding. Because we don't know when that time will come. We're getting ready for the wedding. We're preparing our hearts. We're preparing our lives for that day when we're united with Jesus. And like the bride, we're inviting as many people to the party as possible. Our friends, our neighbors, this city. Hey, there's a party that's about to happen. God is going to heal and restore and redeem all things. And on that day, we don't know the day or the hour. We know the seasons, we know the times, but a day is coming when the Father will say, all right, go get your bride. And we, the church, will be united with him, and just like it says in Revelation, there's going to be no more pain or crying or war or disease or racism or injustice or group text. Like all of those things are gone. The old order of things has passed away, and all things will be made new. Check this out. John 2 then is not only a fulfillment of prophecy, it is a prophecy of what God will someday do with all of creation. Can you see why John says this is the beginning of signs? Study this story, know this story, because this shows us who Jesus is and what he is about to do. And don't you love that verse? It says that the bride was beautifully dressed for her husband. I've never been a bride. That would be weird. But those of you who have, you know that process of becoming a bride on your wedding day, that's, from what I hear, it takes a lot of time, right? A lot of money, 25 grand, but it also takes a whole lot of time. And there's stages you go through, right? So you have the hair, and you have the makeup, and you have the different parts of the wedding dress, and the veils, and the shoes, and the train. Like, all takes hours, right? It takes a long time to get ready for that day. And it's all pointing to a single event. What is that event? All stand, and the music plays, and the bride walks down the aisle, and she's beautiful, and everyone's looking at her, and the groom, he sees her coming. I remember seeing my wife walk down the aisle. It's like, you can't help but cry. It's like the most beautiful, meaningful moment in your life. The bride was preparing herself for her husband, making herself beautiful for that day. When John and Scripture says that we are the bride of Christ, beautifully dressed, it means that even as a bride becomes more beautiful in stages, we too are becoming more beautiful in stages. Every day. It's what the Bible calls sanctification. It's a complex word, but it basically means becoming more beautiful. Every day, you're becoming more radiant. Every day, you're becoming transformed. Step by step, you are being changed. That's why Galatians 5 says, walk in step with the Spirit. Every day, as the bride of Jesus, you're becoming more holy, more loving, more gracious, more forgiving, more full of life, more full of joy, more full of Jesus, more full of hope. You are becoming the bride of Jesus. This is why Revelation 19 says, let us rejoice and be glad. For the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. So I just want to close before we open up the waters of baptism and just ask you that simple question. Are you ready? Are you ready? A wedding's coming, like it or not. You're going to get married. A day is coming when the Father will say, now it is time for the coming together of heaven and earth. Now it is time for Jesus to return for his bride. Now is the time for the renewal of all things. Are you ready for that day? Well, today isn't guaranteed us. Next week isn't guaranteed us. Who knows? Like, our life could end, Jesus could return, and the wedding will happen. Are you ready for that day? You know, one of the upsides of doing weddings in Hawaii was it was simple, but one of the downsides was they weren't always ready. And you could tell that some weddings were kind of thrown together. I remember one where it was this delightful young couple, super sweet, and really chillax. Everything was chillax, except there was one thing that they had planned out. And this one thing was they brought with them to this wedding a box, and inside the box was a dove. And they said, hey, after we do our vows, they handed me this piece of paper. Can you read this poem that we wrote to each other? And in this poem, we kind of talk about our love for each other. And we talk about how our love is like a dove. So it's like two wings, two lives, but one dove, and the wings of love. It's kind of cheesy, but you don't argue with the bride on their wedding day. I'm like, okay, I'll read whatever. And so we do the vows, and then it came time for me to read this thing, and they had it all planned out where after I read this poem about a dove, I was to go down to this box and I was to release the dove into the air, and it's be this epic, poetic, beautiful moment. So I say the vows, then I talk through this poem, the wings of love, and I go down to the box and I take out the dove with both hands and I release it, the wings of love. But what I didn't know, and what they had failed to check on, is that the dove was no longer alive. Now, at first, everything was okay. Like, wings of love, the dove goes up, the photographer's there, and then gravity won. And the dove just drops to earth, hits the sand with a thud. And I've had a lot of awkward moments as a pastor, and nothing comes close to this one because you can't salvage that. Like you can't spiritualize that and talk about resurrection. There's literally there's nothing you can do. And so I just stand there. I didn't know what to say. He's standing there kind of smirking, and And she just kind of looks devastated. And finally, after a few very awkward moments, she's like, should we bury it? I said, probably. And so I dug a hole right there, got the dove, said a few words, buried the dove. It started as a wedding, and it ended as a funeral. Moral of the story, always check the dove. Get a tattoo, always check the dove. They weren't ready. Now, I'd invite the worship team to come up right now, because that's the question I want to leave us with today. Are you ready? Are you ready? I don't know how it's all going to play out, like the book of Revelation, like all the different things and how it's all laid. I don't know. I really don't. But I do know Jesus is coming. And I do know that the bride is going to be united with the groom. And when that day comes, what's it going to look like for you? Will it be the dove? Yes, you're here, Lord. Woo! Or have you been surrendering daily your life to Jesus? Have you been following him? Have you been serving him? Have you been allowing the beautiful work of the Spirit to change you day by day? The bride, she got ready in stages. The bride becomes more beautiful in stages, and so too our life. It gets increasingly more like Jesus the more that we walk with him. But is there anything that you need to do today to make yourself ready? If the moment came, and it will, when God calls you home, are you ready? Are you ready? And I think there are some people in here, you're just not ready. Oh, you know these stories, you know the Bible, you've been walking with Jesus, kind of, step forward, 2 steps back. But truth be told, you've just got so many other things going on in your life, and Jesus isn't a priority to you. He's just something you do on Sunday, occasionally. And I think God brought you here today because he wants to ask you, look, I'm coming. I'm returning. You'll be with me. Life is short. Life is a vapor. It's a moment. I've gone to prepare a place for you that where I am, there you may be also. And I want you to be ready for that. And what is it today that you've just been holding on to that's keeping you from following Jesus and walking in the Spirit? What if God brought you here today because there's something beautiful he wants to do in you? I saved the best till now. That's always the way of the Lord. There's doors he wants to open for you. There's things he wants to do through you. There are places he wants to take you, but you're still stuck on step 1. And maybe for you, step 1, today, give us this day our daily bread. Today, what you have to do is just confess and surrender and give up those things that have been holding you back from taking that first step. And you take that first step. Tomorrow, you take step 2. And the next day, you take step 3. And I tell you what, there's nothing more beautiful and challenging and hard and life-giving and adventurous than walking in step with the Spirit of God, because you get to see how he turns water into wine. You get to see how he changes us. You get to see how he transforms you. The bride's becoming more beautiful. You might look at your life and like, I don't feel that right now. There's so far I want to go. Yes, and it's a journey. Step by step by step. Today, you can take one step, and that one step may be as simple as confession, surrender, saying no to something you know you need to say no to, saying yes to the ways of the Spirit. So I want to invite us right now let's all stand up to our feet, and I just want to create some space right now for God to show us and speak to us what that thing is. What is that first step? God, we come to you right now. We want to be ready. We want to be ready. We want to be ready for your return. We want to be ready if you were to call us home to be with you. And God, where we've been holding back in our life, where we haven't been walking in obedience in the Spirit, we confess that right now. So right now, in the quietness of your heart, I just want you to give to the Lord, confess to the Lord, whatever it is. You know what it is. That thing, that issue, that decision, that sin, that habit, that addiction, that thing that's creating brokenness in you rather than beauty. I just want you to confess it right now and just give it to the Lord. need to know this. Where we look at our life, the bride becomes more beautiful in stages, yet we look at our life and sometimes we're like, I feel like I'm becoming less beautiful. God looks at you, Jesus looks at you, and he says, no, you are the bride. Not you will be someday. You are the bride. You are beautiful to me. That's your identity. Do you know that? You are forgiven. You are loved. You are healed. You are forgiven. You are the righteousness of God in Jesus. The old has passed away. All things are made new. This isn't just a future reality. This is your reality right now. This is the way that God sees you. You are his bride. So live like it. Just live like it. Walk in step with the Spirit.